It almost drove me to tears.
Simpson's work was ahead of its time, and no one picked up on his conclusions about the disaster. He moved to London soon after he published his findings, which were so dense and technical, few could understand them. He soon buried himself in other work.
He lived in his study, had a big study in that biggish house that we lived in there. And he simply stayed in there all the time and didn't come out except to eat a meal, that sort of thing. And I used to go in as a child to kiss him goodnight on my way to bed, but then he didn't even always look up and notice. And I remember coming out saying, "Daddy doesn't love me," because I simply hadn't been able to get any response out of him at all.
Simpson presented his views about the role of the weather in Scott's death only once, in a scientific lecture he gave in 1923. Then, he never spoke publicly about it again.
Simpson was a very meticulous and careful scientist, and I think he would have been reluctant to talk about the weather as an issue very much because he couldn't prove that it was unusual. I couldn't have proved it either until all that nice weather station data was accumulated. So it had to be somewhat by extrapolation that he made his argument, and I think as a good scientist he probably would be uncomfortable with that.
Solomon's work had established Simpson's legacy as a scientist, and had also shattered many of the myths about Scott's ineptitude. But she was still troubled by one aspect of the story.
The thing that kept bothering me at the end was the way they died. Scott and his men made camp on March 19th for the last time. They never left it. March 29th is the date of Scott's last diary entry. It's been thought that a blizzard is what kept them in the tent for 10 full days. But if you've been to that part of the Antarctic, you know that blizzards just don't last more than 2 or 3 days. And if they had a 10-day blizzard, my God, they had the blizzard of a century. And then suddenly I realized that it actually couldn't have happened. Scott's own men provide the observations that show that there was no blizzard. 2 men, Atkinson and Kahane, went out onto the Ross Ice Shelf to look for Scott and Bowers and Wilson. They didn't go very far, but they were experiencing light winds, temperatures of 0 to -17, perfect weather for keeping on going. This was on March 27th. So on March 27th, or maybe even before, the wind had already stopped. That made clear that the reason that the 3 of them stayed in the tent was not a meteorological reason. It had to be a human reason. And that, I realized, was probably the fact that Scott's foot was very badly frostbitten. Wilson, who was a doctor, wrote to his parents that Scott could scarcely walk. He didn't say anything about a blizzard in that letter to his parents. He said that he loved them, that he would see them in heaven, and that the captain just couldn't go on. And so I believe that Wilson and Bowers decided that they simply couldn't accept going on without him, and they perhaps misled him into thinking that the blizzard was still raging. Bowers had tremendous loyalty to Scott. He wrote to his mother that I am Captain Scott's man and will stick by him right through. Wilson, who was a doctor, had talked about if he were ever with a sick companion, he would not be able to abandon that companion, no matter what. Wilson and Bowers are probably the truest heroes of this whole story, if what I'm saying is correct. Because not only did they probably sacrifice themselves, but they did it in silence. They didn't actually write or say what they were doing. I think they were too loyal to do that.
Scott would not have known what his comrades had done for him. But in his final hours, he revealed how highly he thought of them. He wrote letters to their families, making sure they would know how decent each had been. to Bauer's mother.
I write when we are very near the end of our journey, and I am finishing it in company with two gallant, noble gentlemen. One of these is your son. As the troubles have thickened, his dauntless spirit ever shone brighter, and he has remained cheerful, hopeful, and indomitable to the end. My whole heart goes out in pity for you.
To Wilson's wife.
If this letter reaches you, Bill and I will have gone out together. We are very near it now, and I should like you to know how splendid he was at the end. Everlastingly cheerful and ready to sacrifice himself for others. I can do no more to comfort you than to tell you that he died as he lived. A brave, true man, the best of comrades and staunchest of friends.
We can never turn back the clock, but I think it's highly likely that if Scott had survived, his legacy would be viewed quite differently. He still certainly wouldn't have been the guy who got to the pole first, but he would have been the leader of a great scientific expedition, an expedition that even today is viewed as a cornerstone of Antarctic science. He was a man of incredible ability. He was a man who could inspire a lot of loyalty. Then I think we just have to admire what he did achieve and what all of them achieved.